Well, thank you very much, Mr. Müller. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that water is far more than a normal commodity or raw material. And there are a lot of quotations and idioms referring to water. 783 of them are on a list from the Research Center of Hydrology at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. If you travel around the world, this list of quotations will get even longer. Of course, we would not exist without water. We use water for our industries and economy, and also in different other ways. And it's a unique resource, and there are several interests attached to water, and this is why the Water Agenda 21 is the ideal platform to bring together stakeholders from the Swiss hydrology industry. And this is also valuable for us as politicians, and I would like to thank you for that, for coming together and discussing things. And I would also like to thank you for the invitation here and for the possibility to talk to you. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was still young, I spent a lot of time at the river Durach. This is a small rivulet in the canton of Schaffhausen. It goes into the river Rhine, and today it is all covered, or half of it is covered, but unfortunately, I must say, but this can change in future. So, the river Dora was where I spent a lot of time until the day when I almost drowned there. Although the river's name reportedly means thin water, referring to a river that often dries out, which nowadays is often the case. But then when I was younger and when the snow melted, then it was a big rivulet with a yellow brownish water into which I fell and almost didn't make it out. And this somehow shaped my relationship towards water as a leisure time element. But still, I remain a big fan of water. On the other hand, if you come from the canton of Schaffhausen, you know water very well, because we are so close to our river, the river Rhine, which separates Switzerland from its neighboring country. This is our river, the river of the citizens of Schaffhausen, because always where two countries are separated by a river, then the border of sovereignty is in the middle of the river. This is normal and holds true for the whole wide world, except for some exceptions. Namely, in Schaffhausen, the entire river Rhine from the German enclave Büsingen to Orwift, somewhere upstream of the Rhine Fall, is owned by the Swiss. The canton of Schaffhausen up to the cantons of Thurgau and Zurich. This was a gift that King Henry IV made in 1067 on behalf of the Holy Roman Empire. It was a gift to Graf von Nellenburg, the founder of the city of Schaffhausen, and this is why Schaffhausen for a long time had the monopoly of running ships on the River Rhine there, and to transport goods, for instance. And over decades, the income from river transports summed up to almost half of the canton's income. We know this from an essay from the past named "Who Owns the River Rhine?" However, the other side of the river, they tried to get ownership of the River Rhine too, because the river was a growth engine, and over decades nobody cared about environmental protection, water protection. Rather, they had plans for commercial Rhine shipping in this area of the Upper Rhine, but on a length of 120 kilometers, 11 hydroelectric power stations generate electricity, and only few parts remain where the river is still natural. Some years ago, 59% of the Schaffhausen population voted against further use or increased use of hydroelectricity from the River Rhine. The change of law, if it had been accepted, would have caused the construction of a second hydroelectric power station at the Rhine Fall. And most people don't know that there is actually a hydroelectric power station already there, because you can't really see it. So, however, people were afraid about the future of our nature, and the opponents of the revision of the law, they said, hands off the Rhine Fall, and they convinced people, used a lot of emotions, of course. So the people rejected this revision of the law, and the pioneer of water protection was Kurt Berchtold, who 40 years ago was the last president of the Council of States from Schaffhausen, and even he was the last president of the Council of States from Schaffhausen before me, and he even was an editor with the same newspaper as I worked for before he became president of the Council of States. So a decision was taken as early as in 2009, but the discussion continues and has been taken up again. You know what I am talking about here. 5 years ago, the politicians intended to reduce the negative impact of the use of hydroelectricity, and they wanted to make sure that part of our waterways is revitalized, so that the population is giving back part of the natural fauna and flora. You may remember that it was a compromise that caused the Swiss Waterways Association to withdraw its early proposal. And the exclusion of waterways was the reason for a series of political attempts. People demand, or politicians demand, that the revitalization or renaturalization of the rivers must take into account the interests of landowners, of operators, and of other stakeholders. And this means that the laws and rules should be relaxed in urban areas and in rural areas. Things were discussed over a long time in the political bodies, but for the time being, these initiatives have been rejected now, at least in 5 of 6 cases, and in this 6th point that is still being discussed will only come true to a limited extent, because you may remember that The whole package included 6 points, and 5 of them were in contrary to the 2011 legislation. But the Swiss Federal Council needs to make sure the crop rotation areas under the Water Protection Act must be guaranteed, and it remains up to the Federal Council and to Mr. Müller and his people to find a good solution here. But at least this demand is not a contradiction to the waterways protection legislation. And I'm glad that the Council of States also rejected these proposals with a large majority. And I'm optimistic with regard to new political initiatives and pending initiatives that we find good compromises there too. To make progress, we need compromises, because there are interests that are so much opposing each other. And as Stefan Müller already said, I was a key participant in the Commission discussions for the we developed this compromise. There it was very difficult to find a solution, and we all had the impression that either the initiative would have been accepted or nothing, so we needed a compromise, because this initiative just didn't go far enough. And this compromise was possible even though I was just a replacement in this committee. I substituted there for a representative from a canton from southeastern Switzerland, which benefits a lot from the use of hydropower. I don't know whether he actually realized what would happen when I substituted him, but he accepted it, and so this compromise became possible before Fukushima. I don't know what the outcome would have been after Fukushima. Now we have this compromise, and we have to implement this legislation and do not want to call it in question again through new laws and new rules. It is part of democracy that you accept a decision and implement it in the best way possible under the Waters Protection Act that has been in force since the 1st of January 2011. The 2015 strategy will be what we will have to work on in future, and there the national councillors also intend to subsidize major power stations of more than 10 megawatts, and so they get a major share of their investment costs reimbursed. But an extension of hydropower use will have an impact on the ecosystem, and you all know that. People are increasingly aware of environmental protection, and we also know that there's great potential in retrofits of older power stations. So environmental protection and use of hydropower do not have to be mutually exclusive, and here the Hackneck run-of-the-river power station is a good example of that, which is not so far away from here and which you will visit the day after tomorrow. Thanks to 2 flat channels and additional attraction channels, the fish is diverted into the right direction. You know, this is a pioneering project. However, I must say that expenses must remain adequate, and the interests of all stakeholders need to be taken into account. So this calls for compromises. As you know, clean energy from hydropower is in crisis. And this in a country with almost unlimited resources of water. Who or what is to blame for that? On the one hand, the regulators, who with their requirements get the power producers and distributors under pressure. And on the other hand, the highly subsidized discount electricity from the European Union is also difficult for us. You see, the Germans, they subsidize wind and solar power to a very high extent. And I can only call this exaggerated because they also subsidize cheap electricity from coal. But I still hope that even though I have a long tradition with water, and I had this one event where I almost drowned, I still care about what happens to our waterways, and everyone must be able to use these resources, not just we humans. We politicians also need to make sure that we filter out all interests, demands and claims that are well based. So part of our political work is to evaluate, to appraise, to mitigate, to act as mediators. We as politicians will never be able to do everyone right, but we try to create a relaxed atmosphere, reduce tensions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rhine used to be the longest spawning river in the past, the longest salmon river. In the past, they came almost up to the city of Schaffhausen. A document from 1880 said that the most idyllic place for fish was the River Rhine, and the document from 1610 shows how much the Rhine fishers appreciated the fish, because in this document they are asked to continue fishing, and part of the fish they had caught was to be brought to the monastery, just as was the case with wine. Regarding wine, the monastery even wanted to have more than of the fish, and the fishermen were hardly allowed to sell part of what they caught to foreigners, because the mayor and the council of Schaffhausen and the guilds and even the poor people in the hospital got salmon from the fishermen. And now, after so many years, we want salmon to come back from the sea to Switzerland by putting obstacles away, and the biggest part of the River Rhine can now be passed by salmon, and its return is not only good for biodiversity but also good for us as humans, because many of the fish swimming in the water are not just seen as a good omen for affluence, but it's also an old symbol of hope and optimism. And with these words, I wish you a successful meeting here and salmon again in our rivers in the future. Thank you very much.